Hi, everyone. Hey, welcome to the Awareness Podcast with your host, Bill Free. And I have a delightful special guest that I didn't meet her when I was in India in December, last December, but I was in a satsang that she does. She does many a week in Rishikesh, India, and Lisa and I were able to be in a couple of her satsangs 2 years ago, and then this last December when Leif Heimbold and I were there filming for the Awakening Mind documentary films. We were able to meet her staff, and we put together this amazing way that we could film Sadhviji for the Awakening Mind films. And one of her support people there at Parmarth Parmarth Niketan Ashram gave me her book while I was there. She actually gave me two books of Sadhviji's, and I started reading it when I got back before we interviewed her for the documentary film. I got into her book, and it had captured me. And it's pretty thick. I don't know how many pages it is, but I couldn't put it down. And I was telling all of you about it. I was telling everyone I knew about it because it was so inspiring. And I want to thank you, Satvi Ji, for coming on today to share some of the parts of your book from just your own personal experience on a podcast and YouTube. And we'll just connect with that energy as well as your just beautiful, well-written energy that comes forth out of your book. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's such a joy to be with you and such a joy to have this tool of technology that enables us to do this between Maine, where you are, and Rishikesh, where I am. And I'm so touched by your effusiveness and enthusiasm about my book, because it's been an extraordinary journey to live and then to put that into writing in a way that would, yes, teach and yes, share. I mean, obviously, I want people to walk away with teachings that are implementable, that are accessible, that are beneficial for their own lives, regardless of where their life journey may take them, but also to give the felt sense experience of the journey that I've been on, and with all of its agony and ecstasy. So I'm so glad to hear how much you enjoyed it and how touched you were by it.
Yes, I was. My wife said, "Bill, I haven't seen you pick a book up like that in a while," and I just kind of strapped myself to my reading chair and different parts of the house. I didn't want to. I didn't. I wanted to see what was next. And before we get into asking, just sort of delving into my favorite parts in it, where I have questions, I'm just going to give you, the audience, a little background for Satviji. She's American born, as you can tell, and her given name by her guru is Sadhvi Bhagawati Saraswati. Did I say that right?
Perfect.
Oh, good,
Absolutely.
good, good. Okay, because I had to practice that one. She's a PhD, and her book is so fascinating. Her guru sent her back to California, back to LA to get her PhD finished after she started. She had her first awakening experience in Rishikesh. She moved to India in 1996 and Sadhviji is a graduate of Stanford University. She was ordained by Pujya Swami Chidanand Saraswati. He's the president of one of the largest interfaith institutions in India, into the tradition of sannyas, and lives at the Parmarth Niketan Ashram there in Rishikesh, where she leads a variety of humanitarian projects, teaches meditation, gives spiritual discourses, and counsels individuals and families. And my partner and I, for Awakening Mind Films, we hung out at Niketan Parmarth, where the ashram is. It's like the heart of this part of Rishikesh, the main energy of Rishikesh. This is where it all happens. Whether you're a tourist and you're going to Rishikesh, it's right between the two bridges on the other side of the Ganga. And it's the hub of the happening for tourists or Indians. I mean, it's like party central over there in a very sacred way, because the Rishikesh and this part of the Rishikesh, it's a sacred and holy place, and you feel it. I can understand why Satviji, you were just had this automatic pull to the Ganga right there, because it does that to you, that area. It does it to me. I want to go back. And I just came back.
Well, I hope you can come back again very, very soon.
Well, we will. We will. And we also did a couple of meditation classes there with one of your people, Darshana, that was doing the meditations.
Yeah, we have a full day here at Parmarth Niketan of yoga, of meditation. We have a beautiful morning fire ceremony. We have this beautiful evening Ganga Arti, the lighting ceremony. The satsang that I have such a blessing to lead is right after the evening Ganga Arti ceremony. And we're really based, the word Parmarth literally means Param Arth, which is the highest goal of life. Arth is goal, Param is highest. And Sanskrit words have many, many, many meanings. But in short, the word Parmarth means the highest goal of human birth. Niketan means a place, an abode. So it's really dedicated to that highest goal of human birth, which is to know the truth of who you are, to know that divine within the self, to have the felt sense experience, not just you've read it or you've heard it, but actually a felt sense experience of knowing that you are not separate from the divine by any name, any form. It doesn't matter what religion or race or culture or language or tradition people come from, but to have the experience of being inseparable from that supreme reality, that divine, that source of all there is, the creator and the creation and the act of creativity, that we are one with all of it. So that's what the ashram is really dedicated to.
Right. Yes. Yes. And it's so obvious. And so if you haven't been to India and you haven't been to Rishikesh, this is definitely the place you'll end up. You'll just be drawn there, because we were, and it just has this pull. It pulls you in to that experience. Yeah, it's great. Well, let's start. Let's look into your book a little bit. As I said, I was riveted to it. If can you hold a copy of it up? What people would look at
Sure,
as the cover in the U.S. if they ordered it on Amazon?
sure. Yeah, you
Good.
got the Indian edition that was published here by Jaiko, but this that I'm holding is the international edition that was published by Mandala Publications of Insight Editions based in California. And it's, yeah, Hollywood to the Himalayas. And actually my favorite part of it is the quote by Jane Goodall on the cover, who's my hero. And so in terms of the cover design, the aesthetics, the choices that the publishers make in terms of which quote to put where, I love the art of it. I love the aesthetics of it. And I love that it's got Jane Goodall's quote on the cover.
Nice, very nice. Yeah, it has a lot of endorsements. I mean, it must have 20 endorsements of everyone that you can imagine. It's John Gray, Ariel Ford, Deepak Chopra, Marianne Williamson, everyone that you can imagine has endorsed this book, and I mean, it makes sense. It's just it's a very compelling story of someone that it's almost like you were it's almost like this was, well, it's not that it almost was, this was a divine uh, experience where you had to be destined to have this experience because
Absolutely.
yeah. I love the story of when you met your guru and your legs wouldn't work. You couldn't leave before because they wouldn't let you, your legs wouldn't let you walk. You had to walk backwards.
Well, yes. I mean, I tried everything, forwards, backwards. It's a beautiful story because people speak about the touch of God. And I always laugh that I actually needed to be hit over the head with a baseball bat. There may have been earlier, previous gentle touches that I completely missed. And so the divine then had to literally come down with the spiritual equivalent of a baseball bat and whack me upside the head for me to realize who I was, where I was supposed to be, and what my life was meant to encompass. And the story that you're telling is absolutely one of my favorites, both to have experienced it and in the fun retelling of it, because so we come to India. I mean, just to back up for a moment, as you mentioned, I had graduated from Stanford undergrad. I was in the midst of a PhD program. I was 25, and I was not a spiritual seeker by any conscious, deliberate aspect at all. I was an academic. I was committed to my schoolwork. I was very socially active with a lot of friends. I was also in the several year long process of recovering from managing, trying to heal the challenges of my earlier life. I had been severely abused in my early childhood. I had then been abandoned. I suffered severe bulimia in my adolescence as the very best attempt of my psyche to both comfort and nourish myself and make me feel full and whole. And then, of course, to try to free myself of all of the feelings. And by the time I was 25, I had gotten to a point where I had done a lot of work around the sexual abuse, around the abandonment, a lot of work around the eating disorder and what it meant and how to manage my emotions and my food and my meals and my relationships and my life. So if you look at the PhD I was in the midst of, and the 21 units a quarter I was taking, and the marriage I was in, and the friend circle that I had, and the healing that I was working on from all of the psychological issues. The fact that I wasn't also spiritual wasn't something that occurred to me as a lack. My life felt kind of overwhelmingly full. And there was no sense that I had of, oh, there's this other thing, this religion thing, this spirituality thing, this God thing. And if you only had it, then you would actually heal in a completely different way, in a much more powerful way, in a much fuller way, than you would understand who you are. It never occurred to me. I was not raised in a religious family. I didn't know people who were really religious. So the fact that I wasn't, yeah, it didn't occur to me that I was missing out on something. And I come to India at 25. I was an avid traveler. I had traveled a lot through Europe, had spent a year in South America. I had traveled throughout the US. So traveling was something I loved. India was a place I knew nothing about, had very little interest in it at all. However, I was a very strict vegetarian, and I had really struggled with being a very strict vegetarian and someone trying to recover from an eating disorder in places around the world where I didn't speak the language. They had completely different cuisines than I was used to, trying to negotiate with waiters and chefs around making sure that there were no eggs in something, or there was no fish in something, or there was no chicken broth in this vegetable soup. And so when India was suggested, I actually agreed to come only because I knew that I could eat really happily and not have to grill waiters in languages that I didn't speak about what was in the meal. Get to India, open a 500-page Lonely Planet guidebook in Delhi, and I say Rishikesh. I mean, it was like that. And that's why I always say it's a journey of grace. It's not something that I get credit for saying, oh yeah, I recognized the superficiality of the world that I was living in, and I prayed to God to show me something deeper or to bring me a teacher. It was nothing like that. I was really living in so many ways the American culture that I was raised in, not really questioning it, not challenging it in very deep ways like that. And I thought, okay, happiness is going to be about the money you make, the house you buy, the education you get, the relationships you have, the place you vacation, the things that you do with your spare time. I was an avid environmentalist already and loved working for the environment, working for children. So I always knew there would be some element of that type of work. But that was really what my worldview encompassed was get a good education, get a good job, you'll make good money, you'll have a nice house, you'll vacation in nice places, you'll have good relationships. And the idea that there was something more, something deeper, never occurred to me. There was no Google at the time, so we had this big guidebook and open it. I say Rishikesh, we come. And just fast forwarding, because otherwise I could take the whole hour with this story, but I stand on the banks of the Ganga River, the Ganges River, and I had this extraordinary experience of spiritual transformation, of awakening, of a presence of the divine that pervaded everything. It began as I looked out over the sacred river, a river that I didn't even know was holy. But then it stayed with me and it permeated everything that I looked at. Whatever I saw, I was seeing that divine in it. And then I was recognizing that divine in myself, that I was not separate from this experience of God, of the divine, of source, of spirit that I was experiencing in the world around me. And it knocked me quite literally to the ground in tears. And it really began that beginning of the rest of my life, which then fast forward about a week, and I had finally met my guru, Pujya Swami Chidanand Saraswatiji, one of India's most renowned and revered and beloved leaders, not just India, but all over the world. And prior to meeting him, we had planned that we were going to go off into the mountains. I had wanted to stay at this ashram, couldn't figure out how to make it work, but I knew something really powerful was happening. I had had all of these ecstatic experiences on the banks of the river. And when I finally meet him, he says, "Welcome home. Welcome home." He said, "Stay whenever you want." So in my mind at that time, I still thought, oh, all right, so we'll go to the mountains as planned, and then I'll stay here when we come back. And I'm walking to walk out of the ashram to go to the hotel we were staying in. And my feet literally freeze. I cannot pick them up off the ground. It was as though they were literally crazy glued to the ground. And the first thing I think is, oh my God, I've got some awful disease. I've contracted tetanus or polio or one of these things I was supposed to be vaccinated for, and maybe my vaccination didn't work and I've got this awful illness. And then the rational scientist in my brain kicks in and says, chances are diseases don't quite come on like this. Suddenly, out of the blue, no warning, immediate paralysis. And then I thought, all right, well, maybe I wasn't used to sitting on the ground, and maybe my legs have fallen asleep because I was sitting on the ground when I met Swamiji. So I bend down and I start massaging my legs, but there's no pins or needles. There's no numbness. I can feel them. I just can't lift my leg up. And finally, the reason that you were thinking about backwards is finally what happened is you've got to imagine here I am standing in the middle of this ashram, flailing my arms literally like I'm an airplane, trying to take off. And I've attracted a little bit of a crowd. People are watching, what's she going to do next? And at this moment, a group of kids comes running down the central pathway, playing some Indian version of tag. And I instinctively move backwards. And then I realize, oh, maybe I can only walk backwards and not forwards. And so I thought, all right, no problem. I'm just going to spin around and walk out of this ashram backwards. And it shows you, what had been happening to me over the previous week, because otherwise the idea that I've contracted an illness that enables me to walk only backwards would have been ridiculously inconceivable. But I was in a space of such openness and acceptance and surrender and presence of divinity that it just flowed like, okay, if I now have an illness where I can only walk backwards, so be it. And so I spin around to try to walk out backwards. And I can't. Same thing. I cannot pick up my feet. And the scientist in me then kicks in, and I realize, okay, you cannot move facing forward or backward out this ashram. But you have just moved back in the direction of the room from which you came, from Swamiji's room where he was meeting people in what's called darshan. Just people come in to have his darshan, to look at him, to be seen in a way, to be seen by divine eyes, to be able to see the divine and be seen by the divine. People come in for blessings. So I just scooted back when the kids had come. So then I thought, all right, well, maybe it's not the direction that I'm walking, but it's the direction I'm facing. And so I thought, let's see. And I started to walk facing forward, but back in the direction that I had just come, back towards Swamiji's area. And I could walk fine. And so I walk back into his room where he's still meeting hordes of people. And he looks up at me and I said, I think I'm supposed to stay now. And he said, welcome. And yeah, that was it. And this was it was the last in a series of, or not the last of my life, but the last at that moment in a series of things that happened that made me know this was where I was meant to be. And from that first experience of just ecstatic awakening on the banks of Ganga to hearing a voice as I walked through the ashram. That was how I found the ashram, was quite literally hearing a voice as I walked through it that said, you must stay here. And then having my feet literally glued to the ground just made even the non-spiritual person in me know that this was exactly where I was meant to be.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating story in the book where you describe waiting until everyone left Swamiji's presence. You were the last one, and you told him that you were filled with a tremendous fear. And he gave you some suggestions for what to do with the fear.
Yes. So this was really the moment of the healing and transformation that I refer to in my book. The title is Hollywood to the Himalayas, but the subtitle is A Journey of Healing and Transformation. And this moment was the catalyst moment of that healing. So in the darshan times that he gave, some would come just for blessings, some would come to ask questions. And I would just sit and I would just absorb this sacred, holy, incredible energy. And he would sit for an hour. And almost inevitably, the hour would end before the people's questions and desires were finished. And so there was never really an opportunity or an opening for me to say something or ask something. And I wasn't having questions. It wasn't like I was filled with them. I was just so in a state of bliss to find an energetic space that felt so incredibly powerful and so ecstatic. I mean, I was literally crying all day long, every day, not sobbing, but just tears pouring down my face, just tears of ecstasy pouring down my face. And one day, after I'd been there several days, the hour's still on and everybody has bowed and taken their blessings and gone. And he says to me, yes. And I asked him about fear. I was plagued by a lot of stress, a lot of tension. I had always attributed it just to, oh my God, I'm taking 21 units. How can you possibly not be stressed? Or, oh my God, I've got this to navigate with my relationship. Or, hey, by the way, did you forget I'd been sexually abused? Like, of course I'm stressed. Of course I'm tense. Of course I've got these issues. And I just had always attributed it to factors of my life that were beyond my control and that it was just a part of life. But I asked him about it, what to do with fear. And he said, You fear because you don't trust. And I then shared with him my story. I had not told him anything about myself before then, other than that I wanted to stay. And I shared my story of the trauma I had experienced, the way that I had tried to navigate myself through that trauma, the addiction, the depression, all of that I had struggled with. And he looked at me, and it was a story that up until that moment of my life had always gotten me, as you can imagine, lots and lots of sympathy. Oh, ho, ho, you poor thing. You know, like, come here, let me pet you and hold you and take care of you. And he looked at me and he said, are you going to take that to the grave? I was 25. I said, no, no, of course not. Of course not. And he said, so are you going to let it go on your deathbed? And I was silent. And he said, maybe you'll let it go a week before you die, maybe a month before you die. And I was like, no, Swamiji, no, I'm in process. I'm in process. I'm in therapy. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. I'm working through it. And he looked at me and he said, you're waiting for someone else to come in and draw the line. You're waiting for someone to come in and say, you can be done. He said, no one will. It's up to you. You can carry this pain to the grave. You can let it go on your deathbed. You can let it go a week or a month before you die, or you can let it go tonight. And I was like, tonight? Tonight? He said, yes. He said, we have this beautiful ceremony called the Arati on the banks of the sacred river Ganga, this lighting ceremony where we wave these oil lamps. And he said, I will tell the priest to give you the oil lamp. You offer the oil lamp to the sacred mother goddess Ganga River. He said, and then I want you to stand in the river and I want you to give all of your pain, all of your anger to Ganga. And I spent the next several hours in reactions and thoughts that I am not only not proud of, but really quite mortified by 27 years later. And the thoughts were thoughts of, isn't that cute? Isn't that sweet? Isn't that quaint that, you know, he thinks a river would just sweep away my problems as though it were simply an apple core and not this lifetime of struggle that I had been through. And thinking about how lucky I was that I came from a world in which people understood that you don't just throw these sorts of things into a river because, hey, there's a process and you've got to work through the process. And somewhere late afternoon, early evening, I had a moment that I'll always be extraordinarily grateful for, deeply, inexplicably grateful for, when I thought, you know what? You've spent hours now essentially mocking this instruction, thinking that you and your 25-year-old Stanford degree, PhD course, that somehow you know what is needed for healing. This man is a world-renowned leader. He is someone who people come to just for a glimpse of him, a blessing, a word. And he has not only graced you with many minutes of his time, but he's given you a really clear and direct instruction. You must do it sincerely. And of course, I still thought there's no way it's going to work. It's impossible. It doesn't work like this. But at least I shifted from this arrogance and mocking and close-mindedness to a place of sincerity, a place of openness, a place of willingness, a place of possibility. And I walked into the river after the ceremony, And I pulled from within me every aspect, every moment of pain that I could think of. All of the memories, all of the sights, all of the sounds, all of that. And I pulled it up, and along with the pain, along with the anger. And I stood there. I have no idea how long I stood there, but I prayed and I cried and I prayed and I cried. And I just kept giving it to Ganga. And what I can tell you now, 27 plus years later, is it worked. It worked. She actually took it. She showed me that all of that mocking and arrogance and all of that that made me think it wasn't possible wasn't true. It absolutely is possible. But you have to give it. You have to be willing to let go. And it doesn't mean that there was no more work. Of course there was work. There is ongoing work. The human psyche, I think of it as just an almost infinite, like a baklava, where it's just layer after layer after layer after layer after layer after layer. You know, you've got one layer, you think that's it. Layer, 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 and these just layer after layer after layer. And you clear one, and then you discover there's another, and you clear that, and you discover there's another. And so it's not that the work ends, but it's that the openness to the actual truth is what was that. It's a moment of openness to the actual truth of who you are, which is not tainted, not lacking in some way, not your physical body. And this is what I think about and teach with regard to the Hollywood to the Himalayas, is that it's not just the physical journey that my body took. Yes, that is exactly what my body did, went from Hollywood to the Himalayas via Palo Alto. But it's a journey of how we think about ourselves in the world. And that journey is something that, regardless of where you live, regardless of whether you're ever going to make it to Rishikesh, India or not, that mindset shift is the healing. And it's the shift from what I call the Hollywood mindset, but actually is prevalent and epidemic almost everywhere, which is you are your body. You are the size and the shape and the color. You are its achievements, its skills, its abilities, its bank accounts, its title, its career, its relationships. You are what has happened to it. You are what it's done, where it's been. And so we suffer. We suffer feeling not enough because we're not good enough, worthy enough, smart enough, pure enough, divine enough, beautiful enough, successful enough, driven enough, popular enough, funny enough, wealthy enough, whatever it may be that we're looking for. We're never enough. So we suffer, and then we bring suffering to others because we compete, we judge, we're jealous. We live in conflict and separation and polarization that leads to violence. And the Himalayan way of thinking says you have a body, but you're not the body. You are spirit, you are soul, you are consciousness, you are divinity. You're inseparable from that. And that's the shift that really brought about the healing and the transformation. So in that moment for me in Ganga, I shifted, you could say, from a Hollywood way of thinking to a Himalayan way of thinking, that it wasn't that the abuse hadn't happened. It wasn't that the abandonment hadn't happened. It wasn't that I had not struggled, but it was that there was an aspect of me, a truth of me, that was never touched, that was never harmed, that was never abused. An aspect of me that wasn't angry, that didn't feel pain, an aspect of me that if I could just tap into that, the rest of it began to dissipate. Now, of course, I couldn't articulate any of this at that time. I was not thinking in that way. I did not have this aspect of wisdom to know. But that's what I've learned over the last 27 years is, oh, this is what happened. Yes, I gave the pain, but in the giving of the pain, I also gave the identification.
Yeah.
And that's the critical piece, is that I had always identified as, I am the one to whom these things happened. I am the one struggling with this. I am the one with that. And this shift became a shift of, that's not me. I am the one merging with the waters of Ganga. And so as the next 27 years went by with, as I said, so much more work and continual challenges and opportunities to dive deep and expand, you've got that ability to tap back into a place in you that isn't the anger, that isn't the pain, that isn't the identification with the story. And from that place, the healing continues to happen and the transformation continues to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. The one couple of things that you said, and it's mentioned in your book, and I didn't actually, this part isn't mentioned in your book. You mentioned a healthy amount of skepticism that I didn't see in your book. In your book, it sounds like, oh my God, she's been tapped by the divine, and she's had this amazing awakening, and you did, and it's true. But the healthy skepticism coupled with a total surrender also, those two things sort of, they sort of merged with your full openness to let it go, let it all go.
Yeah, it's, the skepticism is the trained, indoctrinated, educated, cultured, even in terms of my family culture, my culture's culture, part of the brain that makes me say, give my pain to a river? Like, really? And yet, the surrender was there because I had had such a powerful felt sense experience of the presence of the divine. Again, as I said, not just around me, but in me as me, that felt more true and more real than anything I had ever experienced. That I was able to drop into that felt sense experience. I think about it as doing a trust fall into the universe. That
Mm.
trust fall, the universe is there to catch us. But so many of us refuse to allow ourselves to fall back. We do these trust falls in schools, in corporate training programs, and you always drop back. You drop back into the arms of someone who even is a stranger or a competitor or an enemy or the schoolyard bully, because you know they're going to catch you. And for me, what I was given in those experiences, those early experiences of the presence of the divine, is, oh my God, the universe is going to catch me. Oh my God, the universe is a safe, divine place. I had never thought like that. The idea that this entire world was pervaded by this presence of the divine that felt like just love and presence and light and extraordinary exquisiteness was something that had never, ever, ever occurred to me. And the fact that I wasn't separate from that I was part of that, again, was as far from the way that I had been thinking as possible. So all of that new felt sense experience gave me, I think, the courage to surrender. I knew I was falling into a safe, beautiful place.
Yeah. Well, your book is so extraordinary and fascinating. Some of my favorite chapters, I'm just going to give about six of them and ask you to pull out one of your favorites from this. But You're Not a Pen, which you sort of just mentioned. I love the story, and this really moved me. Yosemite, giving my marriage to the mountains. When you threw your ring in, I'm going, oh my God, what a moment! I was blown away by that. The Tibetan pilgrimage was amazing, and that whole experience that you described in detail, the cold water, the sprinkling, the mantra, the all of that was just it just is it's just a fascinating read, life experience, inspired experience, and I recommend it anyone that's looking for just a taste or maybe even a big a huge amount of inspiration. Will find it in that book. The Womb of the Mother. And then my favorite is coupled, it's two chapters, the mantra, which is chapter 33, and uh, Om Brahm, which is chapter 48. Those are like my two favorites. I'm not gonna, I actually, when I got to chapter 48, I went, oh, okay. I didn't think we were going to get that, but we got it. Yeah. So anyway, any of those that you would like to speak about? We have about 15 minutes left, and I just absolutely loved your book and your skill, your way of writing is so it's so easy to read. I just loved the way it was almost like I was in your mind, in your life experience in reading your book. Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so, so touched by that. You know, I'll come to the chapter aspect in a moment, but just in response to that, when I knew that I was meant to live here in India, it was clear that my life was going to be a life in service and what we call here in Sanskrit the word seva, which means service. And it's a service of really every minute, every moment being simply a request to God, use me in whatever way. It's up to you, not up to me. I am a channel, I am an instrument. Use me for your divine flow here on earth. And when it came to writing the book, I had had so many people say to me, you should tell your story, you should tell your story. And I knew it was a fascinating story, but because my life is dedicated to service, the idea of spending hundreds of hours writing a book, I just couldn't justify it to myself. I felt like I've done a TED talk, like they can get it in 18 minutes. And it wasn't until many years later when I finally had a couple of friends really push me into recognizing that that which I had experienced was of great value and benefit for other people in their lives and in their struggles and in their challenges and in their way of understanding themselves and the universe and the divine. And I noticed simultaneously something happening here in India, which was that India is very, very good at kind of idolizing their religious and spiritual leaders and putting them on pedestals. And I noticed that I started to be put on that type of a pedestal and held really at that kind of arm's distance, as in, you are purer, better, higher than we are. And people would start prefacing their questions in the satsang with things like, I know you're too pure to think like this, but, or I know that you would never think like this or worry about this, but, and I realized, oh my God, people really think that I essentially descended onto Rishikesh as this sort of virgin angel from the Stanford clouds onto Rishikesh and had no idea of the very human aspect of my story, because most of our spiritual leaders, especially in the East, really kind of from childhood, they know this is their path. Many of them literally have come out of the womb enlightened and are here, we believe, as avatars, as beings who have consciously taken birth to help the rest of us. And so from childhood, the stories are, they're not interested in girls, they're not interested in school, they're not interested in sports, they just want to meditate and pray and whatnot. And that's so obviously not my story. And I realized, though, that people were assuming that it was, and therefore they were putting me up on this pedestal that felt to me like it was not only untrue, but that it was really detrimental for them. Because as long as they could say, oh, she is cut from a different cloth, she is different than I am, it gives them a reason not to step up to the plate of their own lives. It gives them a reason not to work with their own struggles, not to free themselves, not to overcome, not to find courage within, not to listen to their own inner voice. And so it became really important to me to let people know, hey, I know what you're struggling with. Maybe not your exact situation, but I know anger, I know pain, I know trauma, I know struggles, I know yearning, I know depression, I know addiction, I know desire, I know jealousy, I know all of these things. And I also know freedom. And if I can do it, you can do it. And so I share that because, as you so sweetly and lovingly were praising the book, it fills me with such joy, because when I sat down to write it, it was really a question of, okay, is this in service? In service not just of an ego telling its story, but in service of the world, of the planet that I've committed myself to. And so it always makes me feel so deeply happy to hear the way that it's touched people, because it just continues to reinforce for me that yes, it's in service as my mission. In any case, back to your list of chapters, they're all so, yeah, they were all really, really profound. I think let's take the mantra chapter, since you said it's favorite, and
Oh,
then
yeah.
I'll speak for a moment about Om Brahm, the final chapter. But the one about mantra was really powerful because I struggled so much with just a brain, a mind that never stopped. And it was constantly judging and comparing and frequently negative about myself. And I was caught in a whole variety of different mental thought patterns and ways that my brain would go about myself, about the world around me, about food, about my body, about my worthiness, about relationships, about my mother, about my dad, about what was important in life, about all of the different things I thought about. It was just a nonstop craziness in my mind. And after I had this really powerful spiritual experience at the beginning, I was gifted with these long periods of time of just being in a state of stillness, of an expansive stillness. And it was so precious and so delicious and so exquisite that then when the mind comes back and starts playing its games again, even if it's slightly less than it was before, nonetheless, it was there. And I wanted freedom from it. And my meditation practice, of course, helped somewhat, but the mind was the mind. And when I was given a mantra, in the Sanskrit tradition, so the mantra, the actual semantics of it, the translation of it is so frequently just a heartfelt surrender to an aspect of the divine, whether it's Krishna's, Vishnu, whether it's Shiva, whether it's the Divine Mother, whether it's Om. But the way that the words are put together, the string of the words, the way that they're chanted, is actually an alchemical power that transforms you on the inside. So the chanting of the mantra itself has this power. But for me also, it had this incredible power of giving me what I've come to think of as my life raft, that whenever the mind would get crazy and lost in its own cycles and lost in its own patterns, I was given something that I could grab onto and that would pull me out of that craziness of the mind, out of that mental patterns, and that would bring me straight back into presence, into truth, into self, into surrender, into devotion. So the being given of the mantra was an incredible experience by Swamiji. It really felt like he planted the mantra into my very brain so that the mantra began to chant itself. There's aspects when you chant that are very conscious. You take your mala, your rosary, and you actually do your conscious mantra recitation. But then what happens is the mantra actually begins to chant itself. And what I've noticed through these years of doing it is my entire mental landscape has changed. The moment that the mind even starts to begin to stray into craziness, almost automatically the mantra will start chanting. And if it doesn't, the moment I realize, oh my God, I'm lost in this, I can bring it back through this mantra. So it's an incredibly powerful practice of working with the mind. It's so funny. We talk about this all the time in satsang because working with our mind is something that everybody wants to do. How do I overcome negative thinking? How do I overcome judgment? How do I overcome comparison? How do I overcome the monkey mind? And yet we all seem to think that somehow there should just be a magic wand and immediately I should be able to do that. Whereas any other aspect of our bodies, we know that you need to practice, you need to train it. Nobody would ever say like, hey, make me a ballerina. Like just wave your magic wand and make my legs and arms and body be able to do that. You would never say, hey, make me Mozart, or let me be able to play the piano, the violin, the guitar. Just wave a magic wand and let me be able to do that. Or even just something like running or playing basketball or swimming laps. We understand that there's muscles in our body that need to be trained to do it. And in the same way with the mind, I always think about the mind as a muscle. And that which you do with it is that which it's going to keep doing. If I lift up this glass over and over and over again all day long, eventually these muscle groups are going to form according to me lifting up this glass. And that's how the mind works. That which you do, it forms its muscle groups. Neurologically, we speak about, neural patterns and networks and neurons that fire together, wire together, and all of these ways of understanding that basically that which you keep doing is that which you're going to keep doing. That which you keep thinking is that which you're going to keep thinking. The way you react is the way you're going to keep reacting. The temper tantrums you throw are the temper tantrums you're going to keep throwing. You are actually laying stronger and stronger tracks, grooves in your very psyche that make that happen. And so, what the mantra does is it gives us a way, a technique, a tool out of that. And it gives us something different to attach the awareness to. And the fact that it also alchemically transforms you is, to me, just a real added bonus.
Yeah. Well, it's obvious. I mean, I do think that your book, and this is the Indian cover of your book, but I do feel that your book is in service to inspiring people in so many different ways. It's just, and I love the humility that you express in being wise in not wanting to be on a pedestal, because that doesn't serve anyone. It much better serves people to just everyone is on the same level, no matter whether if you're up on the stage, you're in your role and you're doing your role to the way it looks like. I've been in your satsang. It's a very it doesn't feel special, but it feels a little bit sacred, as it should, I think. It's just a place where the heart opens up and you're in a space that's provided where transformation can take place, healing can happen. And your book is very obvious that healing is possible in a huge way. I mean, your story is forget about it. But thank you so much for this time to share on the Awareness Podcast and just little parts of gold that are in your book. And Sadhviji, thank you for being in my life and in our experience here at the Center for Awakening. And I look forward to seeing you in the film that we filmed there that'll be out next year. And all that you do is just amazing. I look forward to meeting Swamiji one day. And until we meet again, my blessings to you and everyone.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the beautiful, beautiful work that you are doing to really connect people to that sacred source within themselves and to help people touch that and tap into it and experience it. It's a very, very beautiful service, and I'm so happy to be part of it. And again, I'm so happy and touched and feel just so blessed by your effusiveness around Hollywood to the Himalayas. And thank you so much for having me here and sharing with your beautiful community.
Well, the pleasure is all ours. And I look forward to sharing this broadcast with the world as well.